So the thing with 3D scenes is that they can often feel a little bit too perfect, or maybe too clean or too polished. But with a few simple tools and some of the newer filters in Adobe Substance 3D Painter, you can push things to a much more painterly look, something that feels like an illustration, and that way you can create something that feels truly unique and a lot more expressive and personal. Hey, if you're new around here, my name is Pablo Munoz. I'm a 3D concept artist and educator, and I help artists level up their skills in the world of 3D, all in a way that is fun, clear, and actually doable. So in this video made in partnership with Adobe, I'm going to show you how I created this painterly stylized look for a 3D scene using really cool filters and a non-destructive workflow, all inside Substance 3D Painter. Let's jump straight into it. Alright, so the first thing I want to show you is the path tool. I've got a fill layer here in a black mask and a paint effect in that mask. With the path tool active, I can go ahead and click around something like the ceramic jug and paint a line like so. Nothing too fancy yet, but the cool thing about this is that you can now edit that stroke and the path itself, so you can do that without destroying anything. Let's go ahead and replace the alpha, for example, with something like this ornament shape, and you can create your own as well. This is just a black and white image. I'll also adjust the spacing and the brush size, and you'll see the details update and follow the path. It's such a nice way to add intricate details in a very easy, not destructive way. Now let's go ahead and right-click on the path icon here at the top left of the interface, and we can go ahead and duplicate the entire stroke. I'll move the points upwards a bit just to create a second row of the same details. And since all of this is editable, I can go ahead and keep adjusting the duplicated path. And once I'm happy with this, I can drop a totally different shape or a new ornament just to get a completely new pattern. Super fun and super flexible. Next up is one of my favorite techniques with the new filters. I'm going to use the sardines in this example, and I already have relatively decent textures on them. But this is just a photo I projected on them. I want to stylize it a little bit more and make it feel like it's actually painted on. So in the filters library, I'm going to search for Stylized Filter. There we go. And even the little icon itself gives you a sense of what this thing does. And all I'm going to do is drag and drop it onto the object itself, and you'll see that it's added to the texture layer stack. Now from this one filter, you can get a wide range of different looks. You can see the effect of this filter straight away, and you can switch between different presets just to explore some quick variations. Some of these are really cool, and some might be a little bit too much for this type of project. I like to reset things to the default and just fine-tune different settings from there. I'm going to start with the stroke amount slider, and this basically controls how many visible strokes appear on your object. You can also change the stroke type from this drop down here and adjust the stroke size as well. Then under the brush stroke effect, I like to increase the color variation, and this is a personal thing just because it gives me a nice sort of impressionist touch kind of thing, because it makes the stroke color differences more evident. One extra tip that I'm going to give you is that you can add a Sharpen Filter on top of this stylization. Make sure that the color channel is active in that Sharpen Filter so that it only affects the color, and this will help you separate the tones a little bit and boost that contrast between the colors in a subtle way. Now let's look at something similar. I'm going to use the wall behind this object for this one, and I've added a damaged plaster material from the Substance 3D Painter library, which, it's available in the assets so you can download it at any point. And I like this one because it has lots of different color and value variation, which makes it ideal for this next step. Alright, so from the filters library, let's go ahead and search for Anisotropic Kuwahara. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. And let's go ahead and drag and drop it into the stack of layers. This effect looks at the colors and the values in your texture and smudges them in a directional way, almost like a brush stroke, but almost like finger paint. It also softens the surface and creates a really nice painterly effect. Of course, like any other filter, you can go ahead and tweak the sliders to dial the result a little bit, but honestly, the fun part is just experimenting and see how each setting changes the look. That's usually how I refine the feel of the surface. So play around with the settings and see what you get. Now let's try another powerful filter, the Directional Distance. The effect of this filter is very straightforward, similar to the directional blur in Photoshop, but you can tweak it to make subtle and very cool improvements to your textures. For instance, the blue tones here on my sardines textures feel a little bit washed out. So I'm going to drag and drop the Directional Distance filter directly onto them, and you'll see the effect right away. But this is actually washing out the colors even more. However, this is expected since the effect is actually blurring the colors based on the angle and the distance here. So the cool thing is that you can actually change the blending mode of a filter. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and set this to soft light, which is actually a blending mode that contrasts the colors underneath. And now you'll see when I turn this on and off, kind of like before and after, the blue colors get a little bit brighter. Now the final step is obviously to adjust the distance and the angle of this filter to essentially blur the strokes that we already have from previous filters, and this will push the painterly look even more, while at the same time adding a little bit of contrast. And just to prove the point of how useful this is, I've also done the same thing for the tablecloth. So if I turn this layer on and off, you'll see that I'm actually making the blue colors brighter, but also introducing a little bit of lighter variation to the strokes and to the overall color in this tablecloth, making things feel a bit more organic. The next filter in the list of cool stuff is the Grayscale Conversion Filter. It might sound very simple, like just desaturating the image or the texture, but it actually unlocks some really useful workflows. I'm gonna use it in the chair for this scene, and I already have a wood material with some stylization applied to it, but it feels a little bit flat. I want to add some chips, maybe some scratches, and in general, make sure that this chair looks aged or there's a lot of wear and tear on this one, but at the same time, I wanna keep the stylized look. So let's drag a Grayscale Conversion Filter onto the layer stack, and it automatically creates a paint layer. This filter essentially converts the texture underneath or anything that's below this effect or this layer into a grayscale. And from here, you can use a slider to boost the contrast or maybe to isolate certain values. And these settings are very intuitive. Now I'm going to drop an anchor point on this layer, and I'm actually going to turn it off. Then I'm going to create a new fill layer, add a black mask, and inside that black mask, I'm going to create a fill effect. And here's the trick. For the input of the fill effect, I'm going to reference the anchor point that we just created in the layer below. Even though the original layer is off, the anchor point still works. It's still anchoring or referencing this effect of this image. So basically, we can reference that grayscale image without actually seeing it. So now I'm going to enable just the height channel in this fill layer. And this basically gives me direct control over the height information based on the grayscale values that we just created, which is a really clean way to add this type of surface variation. I think this is pretty cool, but if you're still not convinced, let's go ahead and wrap up this video with one more example and one last filter. Let's take the lemons object as an example, and I basically have the same setup as the chair. I have a paint layer with a grayscale conversion, an anchor point referencing that effect, and a fill layer with a mask referencing that anchor point. The only difference is that I haven't adjusted the grayscale filter just yet. So you can see more values, and we have more values to work with. This is where the Quantize filter comes in handy. So let's turn off everything for a moment just so that it's easy to see what is happening, and go to the filter library and search for Quantize. And here we go. Let's go ahead and drag and drop it just below the grayscale conversion inside the paint layer. So this filter is going to simplify your texture by reducing it to a set number of values. I'm going to set it to 2 so that we can get just a light and a dark gray. That's it. I'm going to also slightly adjust the contour smoothing just to clean it up. And now when we enable the grayscale conversion again, we're only gonna get those 2 simplified tones. And since our fill layer is controlling the height information using this input, we can get this nice stylized sort of bump effect that follows the shape and the brush stroke. It's a very simple trick, but it gives these lemons a lot more character, I think. So this whole approach is about combining procedural tools and creative filters to build something expressive and, like I said at the beginning, feels a bit more personal. And the cool thing is that you don't have to stick to this method that I just showed you. Sometimes the most interesting results come from mixing things together in unexpected ways. Now, what about if we apply the stylization and the filters to something that already feels stylized from the model itself? Like, for instance, this smart material for the crab project. Now, I have an entire video covering how I created this smart material for the crab, so go ahead and check it out and see if you can combine what you learned from this video and from that tutorial and create something unique that looks very cool and stylized. See you in the next tutorial.